Welcome to this video where we're going to be walking through how to raw pack pressure can fresh shelled beans. Now, I have to say, doing the raw pack method on vegetables is honestly my favorite way to can vegetables because it takes the least amount of prep work and time. I find it much faster than doing pickles and jams and jelly and all those different things, pie filling. So this is by far my favorite way. And when it comes to having canned beans on the shelf, when you grow them yourselves and or go to a U-pick and you're able to get them when they are fresh as a shelled bean, this is a lot faster than having to soak those dried beans and then canning your recipe that way. So here you can see I have picked all of my beans and I shelled them out. And I just filled this with water maybe about 5 minutes ago just to give these a quick rinse because I shelled these when I was out in the garden and there's little bits of stuff in there. One of the things you want to do is, if there's any really small seeds, which when you're shelling, these just happen to go in there, we're going to go ahead and pick these little itty bitty ones out. We don't need them in there. And of course, any little bits of, dirt and tiny little seeds. These probably would fit through the holes in my colander, but I'm just going to remove them anyhow to be on the safe side here. So we're going to go ahead and get these dumped and rinsed. Now you're going to notice that there are different colors beans in here. These are all from the same bean. These are from my family's strain of the Tar Heel green pole beans that I've let matured out to where the bean inside the pod is large enough, obviously, to shell and then for us to eat. So these are ones that are a bit more immature, and so these are the ones that are more of a bright green or a full green. Then you'll see some that are kind of in between. They've got a little bit of green on them. And then you'll see ones that are almost completely white. So these are all fine stages to shell out and to can, but what we don't want is any of these beans that have actually started to dry out inside the pod. If they're dried out, they're going to soak up too much moisture when you're trying to pressure can them, and they need to be done if they're dried out, then we need to treat them like we would a fully dried bean. Even if they're like halfway or looking like they're starting to be dried, they're not fully dried, then we're going to treat them like we would a dried bean, and we're going to follow the canning instructions when you're canning dried beans. So it's really important that when you got these shelled beans and you've harvested them for the pressure canning, that they are fresh and they haven't started to dry out at all. And you'll know that because they're plump. There's no signs of shriveledness on here. And if you are to push your thumbnail or your fingernail or anything like that into the bean, it will leave an indent and a mark, and it really easily pierces that bean. Those are all signs that they're, fresh and soft and ready to go. So you can do these in either pint and or quarts. So they're safe to do either way. I am going to be doing these in pints, and that's going to hold approximately 2 cups. So you want to have your pint jars washed and rinsed in really hot water so that these are not cold. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to fill these with our beans here. Now, one of the things when you are canning anything like this that is a shelled bean and or a shelled pea, they will absorb liquid when you can them, and you usually will notice a little bit more liquid loss than you're used to seeing with things like green beans or carrots or other things, vegetables like that when you're using the raw pack method. You do want to make sure too, as you're filling your jars with your beans here, that you are picking out any that shows any signs of like insect damage or disease or rust or anything like that. We don't want to can those. So they just want to be in their prime condition. So you're going to fill these to a 1-inch headspace on pint jars. If you are doing quart-sized jars, it's 1.5-inch headspace. So this is where there is a difference in headspace depending upon the size of jar that you're using. So we have got our measuring tool here, and we're going to measure, and I will bring mine of the shelled beans just below that 1-inch headspace of the solid beans because we're going to be adding water. You don't want to push these down. This is not an instance where we're going to be packing tight, unlike some with tomatoes and different products like that. Some things will pack them really tight. You do not want to pack these tightly. I like to add salt when I'm canning mine, so it's either a half a teaspoon when you are doing pints or a full teaspoon when you're doing quarts. And because we're gonna be adding the boiling water that I've got going in the kettle right now to all of these jars, I go ahead and get all of these filled with my beans and my salt in one assembly style type thing. Good rule of thumb is right about to the shoulder or right above the shoulder of the jar. I fell a little bit shy on this one, and you never ever want to can anything unless you can fill the jar up completely. The head space and the measurements are there for safety, not just for the sake of having a full jar. So I'm gonna hop right back out to the garden and just finish shelling out enough beans to get this jar all the way up. And one of the beautiful things about the wrap pack is my jars will stay warm because it's only going to take me a minute, and I just have my water boiling in the kettle, so I don't have to worry about these staying a certain temperature. I can go out and get that jar all the way filled up. Okay guys, I'm back from the garden, got this jar all the way full, and now I'm going to finish doing the salt on my remaining 3 jars. Go ahead and check that head space. Like I said, I like a generous 1 inch, so I don't even bring it all the way up to a full inch with the beans. Now we're gonna be adding our hot water. So I've got water here in the kettle that is just coming off of a boil, and we're gonna get those filled. We do wanna remove any air bubbles, but we're not gonna add any more beans, even if this does get us some extra head space. We'll just add a little bit more water. There we go. Now you're gonna notice that the majority of these beans are green. If you're doing something like a lima bean, you wanna make sure that the beans you're using for the fresh shelled and doing this raw pack method are green. And you'll see that even here, the majority of these are green. You're not seeing a jar full of white beans. Okay, we've got 2 inches of water and a rack in the bottom of our pressure canner, and that water has been kept on about medium-low heat. You don't want to put a jar that's been filled with boiling water into cold water because that could do a temperature shock. So now it's time to get our lid in place, and then we will increase this. So before we put our lid on, we always want to hold it up to light and make sure that you can see light through this vent pipe, that it's not blocked in any way. That's so that it can vent properly and it doesn't build up too much pressure. And then we always do opposite sides of these screws, and then we screw them down evenly so that the lid is locked into place evenly and you don't have one side that's up higher than the other. This ensures a good, tight, solid seal. Now we're gonna go ahead and increase the temperature to high heat, and we need to have a steady stream of pressure come out of this vent pipe for 10 minutes before we go ahead and put our weight on and bring that to the 10 pounds of pressure. Now for me, I'm only at about 500 feet above sea level, so I am going to be using 10 pounds of pressure. You use 10 pounds of pressure if you are 1,000 feet or below sea level. If you are 1,001 feet above sea level, then you're gonna be using 15 pounds of pressure. So your altitude definitely needs to be taken into consideration when you are doing your canning times. Water bath canning, you actually need to increase the amount of time that you're processing your jars, and with pressure canning, you're increasing the pounds of pressure. Vent like this for 10 minutes. Okay guys, so we have turned off the timer, let this sit until the dial gauge shows 0 pressure, so we've let it reduce pressure naturally. But you always want to check and make sure that the pressure is fully reduced before you ever try and remove the lid. So one of the ways you can do that, this is still really hot, so you're just going to want to take an oven mitt and bump this weighted pressure gauge. So you don't want to hear any air coming out of that or it hissing at all when you bump it. So we don't hear any sound, so we're gonna remove it. And I can hear just a little bit of air exhausting out of there, but not really under pressure. So you're gonna wanna let this sit for another about 10 minutes before we try to remove the lid. Okay, so we're gonna undo this the same way we put it on. I always loosen each screw the opposite from the other one. And again, you want to make sure that you've got some oven mitts on. You don't want to brush your bare skin against the handles because this retains heat for quite a while. Whenever you're removing the lid, you always want to make sure that you remove it as a shield away from your face. So any steam that comes up is not hitting me in the face, the lid is blocking it. And then to help reduce siphoning, we are gonna wait for 10 minutes before we remove the jars after we have taken the lid off. Okay, so it's been 10 minutes, so now it's time to bring our jars out and put them on our towel. Now the jars are still really hot. You wanna make sure you're using a jar lifter or some type of protection like an oven mitt. So here you can see the beans right after they came out of the pressure canner, and you'll actually still see a few little bubbles going. That's because it's still that hot inside the jar that water is still kind of boiling a little bit. So that will settle down after these have had a time to cool and to fully seal. But you can see that we had a little bit of liquid loss, and you'll see it a little bit more. This front jar, there's barely any liquid loss, not very much at all. But then you get back to this second jar, and you can see that there are a few of the white beans that are sticking out above the liquid level, and that's totally fine. That happens quite often whenever you are canning peas and or beans. It's very normal as long as there is still at least 1/2 of the jar has liquid in it, and this is definitely way more than that, then it's fine to put on the shelf provided you followed safe processing times and that they sealed. And you'll also see they're not really green anymore, just a little bit. They definitely look a lot more like a regular white bean after they have been cooked and went through the canning process. So now we just need to let them sit and cool for 12 hours, then we'll check the seals and they are ready to go. These are great to have on hand to use just like you would any canned white bean. I love to add them to soup, and you can even use these to make refried beans if you don't have any pinto or other red type of bean. And these are also really good if you just want to add some bacon and ham to them to make a quick soup and serve it with either cornbread or biscuits. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that you hit subscribe and that little bell so you get notified when any of our videos go out. And if learning how to can, and specifically how to pressure can safely, is something that you're interested in, make sure that you go and get signed up for my free online pressure canning video series. I'll have the link in there below, or you can just go to melissaknorris.com/pressure canning, and I will walk you through step by step how to safely operate and pressure can your own food at home. Let me know in the comments below any questions that you have on canning your own homegrown beans.